welcome back to LA Not So Confidential's Behind the Couch. So we are parked behind the couch today with an amazing guest, retired Secret Service agent John Taylor. We have a lot of questions for him. He's going to be running from us very quickly, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. I want to do a couple housekeeping items first. First of all, look at my new Los Angeles shirt. Isn't that cute? Actually, I got it the same place where we got these 2 bags that we're going to give away. We have to decide how we're going to give them away.
Okay.
Maybe we could do one for a Christmas gift at the Christmas party and something else. You and I are going to have to think about that. But
that sounds great.
Kind of cool little things. So we have some new Patreon members that we want to give their shout outs to and just say thank you, as always. So we have our new Patreon members, Angie R, Derek D, and Christy L. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it 1,000 times over. I'm just throwing my pen. That's how appreciative I am. Also, last festival of the season coming up, Pacific Northwest True Crime Festival, is October 8th and 9th, just around the corner. So you can still get tickets for that. And we're going to be speaking, we're going to have a presentation on incels, which we are all warmed up to do because we just did a 2-hour one this week. And you can get a discount, a 15% discount if you use the promo code LANOTSO15, LANOTSO15, and you can get your tickets. And we would love to see you in the Pacific Northwest. Scott and I are going to do probably kind of a little Pacific Northwest themed appropriate episode for our next psych episode. So we're going to talk about how weather affects your mental health. Appropriate for up there.
And how it can make you kill. Weather can make you kill.
Oh my gosh. That's it. Does it make you a murderer? And can you use it as a defense? No. Right. No. You cannot. Anything else new? Anything else I'm forgetting?
No, I think that's it.
I just want to say hi to everybody. Yeah. Scott, why don't you do John's introduction? John, feel free to throw your camera on and join us as Scott tells us all about you.
Yes, very, very impressive and quite an intimidating guest. We have John W. Taylor, who is a prolific writer in the true crime genre and serves as the producer and host of Twisted. It is a podcast devoted to the analysis of true crime cases and related topics. He also produces and co-hosts the episodic true crime podcast, Criminal Conduct, because of clearly this is a hard charger and he can't do just one thing. Right. He has to just shame all of us for being lazy. John wrote and published Umbrella of Suspicion, investigating the death of JonBenet Ramsey, and Isolated Incident, investigating the death of Nancy Cooper in 2012 and 2014, respectively. He has contributed articles to the All Things Crime blog, Crime Traveler, and Court Junkie. He is a licensed private investigator and former U.S. Secret Service agent. He currently resides in North Carolina. I'm not going to even say what city because I'm not going to take that chance and have it come back on me.
Oh, man.
We protect our guests.
We do. Scott's a little...
I'm a little skittish these days, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that intro, Dr. Scott.
You're welcome.
Good to see you again, John.
Yeah, good to see you guys.
So if I had known that you had written a book on the JonBenet Ramsey case, I probably would have just cornered you even more at the festival so we could chat. I probably have 9 books on it, but I don't have yours.
Yeah, I probably have that many as well. I at one point I was reading anything and everything written about that case.
For sure. I mean, yeah, you and I could probably talk ad nauseum about it. Since we're talking about this, I know we're going to get into lots of other stuff about your career, but what prompted you to write that?
So the thing that interested me most about the JonBenet Ramsey case is the idea that people seem to either put the parents in or out as possible perpetrators. And what I saw was a divide between husband and wife. And so I found it very interesting, the idea that maybe the couple or the spouses are not on the same page. And so that's not something that people had seemed to look at.
Clearly.
And so I just was very fascinated by that, because that puts on a totally different dynamic. What if only one of the spouses knows what went on? how does that change things?
Yeah,
So that was really what drew me in.
Instead of these two binary options, kind of looking beyond that. Yeah, you definitely don't hear about that very often. So do you say publicly what you think happened?
I don't think it was an intruder.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
well,
I'm officially Team John then, because
my God.
I just cannot, and I don't even know as much as everyone else knows about this, but I never thought there was an intruder. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, I would love for you to tell us more about why it doesn't make sense so I can justify my belief as well.
Well, what I would say, not even talking specifically about this case, but you would be very hard pressed to find a case where a child was murdered inside the home and no one else was killed and it wasn't somebody in the house. That is a very, I mean, kids.
Occam's razor, kind of, right?
That is a very, I have done a lot of research. I have found one or two in all. I mean, it is a very rare thing to occur. So at the very beginning, the fact that she wasn't taken out of the home, that no one else was injured, there were adults in the home that were left unharmed, that is highly, highly unusual and draws a, immediately red flag for investigators.
Okay, awkward silence for me.
Are you in the intruder theory?
I'm totally in a team intruder. But to your point, I am such a statistics person first, so I definitely come across with like, okay, what do we see in these cases, and I always work my way down from there. But I think this is that anomaly. So yeah, I think it's that incredibly rare one. But I'm glad we've opened that can of worms. We can always continue that. But then also sometimes I'm like, I just don't ever want to talk about that ever again.
Yeah.
So on other polarizing topics, John, tell me what you think about the movie In the Line of Fire, because we talked about it in our episode.
Well, I would say that Dr. Shiloh's comments on that movie almost stopped me from doing this interview because she went after the iconic character that Clint Eastwood played in that movie. Just like this.
Just crapped all over Clint Eastwood.
Right. Oh, he's just so, I just couldn't hardly take it. I almost turned the episode off. I was so upset.
Well, you're a compassionate feeling man, and you have some, concern for Mr. Eastwood and his character, right?
His character.
And I don't think that I have seen that movie in the last 20 years. So my thoughts and feelings and emotions are from the 90s of watching that movie.
100%. I was with you. I was like, oh my God, this movie was so good when it came out. And I just remember John Malkovich being super creepy, and like, it felt like it all went together so well. Does not hold up.
No,
don't go back and watch it, because I don't.
It gave me a false sense of what to expect as a Secret Service agent. That's for sure.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting question. Is there any media representation out there that you feel does represent it accurately for what your experience was?
Well, sadly, I have not seen this movie, but I have been told by other agents when I was on the job that Driving Miss Daisy is a much more accurate depiction of being a Secret Service agent. And I haven't seen that movie, so I can't comment. But when I heard them say that, I thought that makes a lot of sense to me.
Oh boy,
Hilarious.
you are really saying a lot in just a couple of sentences. You're really saying a lot. That's fascinating.
Well, so can you tell us how you started in law enforcement and why Secret Service eventually?
Sure. So as a child, so probably around the age of 12 is when I got interested in true crime. And so I was also interested in the stock market, Wall Street type thing. So those were kind of my interest as a child.
Okay.
And then actually seeing the movie JFK in high school, which turned out to be, there's probably more inaccuracies in that movie than any other movie I've ever seen. However, it got me mentally thinking about assassination, about the Secret Service. And so that got my mind thinking in that realm. And so I guess when it comes down to it, with the Secret Service, they investigate financial crimes. So there's that element to it. And then there's also the protection aspect. So I was very much interested in, I'd love to be able to protect the president. So I think it was kind of a combination of those two.
And the copious amounts of cocaine done by Oliver Stone as a director. Your career was inspired by a coke-addled director. Very good.
Lovely.
And so after I graduated college, I went into the Secret Service the following year.
Did you have anyone in family or that you knew that was in law enforcement at all that kind of had you interested? No?
No.
So what, you said being interested in true crime from a young age. Do you remember the cases that were kind of happening at the time that got you hooked or that you were taking note of?
Yeah, the first one that I can recall in about sixth grade, I remember Charles Manson and being very fixated on that case, the Helter Skelter. There was like a mini series, Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy. So I guess you'd say more of the serial killers at the time.
Yeah,
I've grown since then into other areas, but as a young child, I was much more interested in the really extreme crimes. And I attribute that mainly to growing up in the Midwest where nothing seemed to happen. And I was in a very small town. And so to me, it was just completely intriguing and perplexing that there could be people this evil. It's just so different than anything I experienced.
Sure.
So it intrigued me.
So what was the process like for processing with Secret Service as an agency?
It was an incredibly long, drawn-out process that seemed to never end. And I think the younger you are, a week in your 20s, it's like 6 months now. I don't know how that works, but back then, I remember, the time between Thanksgiving and Christmas, that was like a year as a kid. But anyway, so it felt like forever. It took a year and a half for me to be hired from the time I started the process. And I had to do a polygraph and, background investigation, a number of interviews, drug tests, things of that nature. And so it's just kind of you progress from one thing to the next. And at any point, if you get cut out of the process, it's over. And so it's a lot of waiting and patience, which is a real negative. I mean, most people think that's a real positive, but I like one of the guys I worked with, he was in his second year of law school when they called him. And so he just dropped out of law school, and that just doesn't make any sense. They need to be either hold that slot until he graduates or get him before he goes in. To me, that's just a disservice to everybody for things like that to happen.
It is. As someone who's been through the process I took a written test for U.S. Marshals just because I wanted to see what the federal written test was like. And then I processed with the FBI to where they gave me a conditional job offer, and I ended up following through with psychology instead before they could start my background. But it is sort of this entitlement of it's going to take us as long as it's going to take us. And you take it when we tell you to or not, sort of thing. And same thing for local law enforcement too. They tell you to jump, and you ask how high and when to do it. And, you're just so kind of fixated on the glorification of this job that I think that's how a lot of people put up with it. That's
right. That's exactly right.
I wanted to ask you, did anybody lead you through the process? I know when my nephew, my nephew was told, he was able to do an internship, and they said, hey, this might be a good fit for you, but go get a couple of years of law enforcement. He had somebody that told him the steps, definitively, this will make sure that you can get in. So how did you figure it out? Well,
I was a lot cockier back then, and I don't say that as a positive, but there's something about even cockiness that's not warranted. You get that confidence, you just keep plugging ahead. And so I just felt like I was going to get in. But, even at the time, I felt like I could have stopped somebody on the street and asked them, where am I in the process for being hired? And the answer they would have given me would have been just as accurate as what I was getting talked about. I was a year into it, and the person said something about how, I hadn't even started the process. And I said, well, then how would I have already taken a polygraph?
Yeah.
It was like there was just no communication. I was completely in the dark right up until I got the offer.
Wow.
That's wild. That's so wild. So you talked about, being interested in the stock market at 12. And we're doing a great job at like picturing young John, right? And John now.
It's like a little Alex Keaton in Family Tie. Like
that was my obsession.
Tie, yeah.
You hit that one exactly right.
So obviously you picked an agency that was really fitting for you, but can you tell us a little bit about the different assignments that you can work in the Secret Service, and what did you end up gravitating towards? Maybe you had to do a bunch before you could get to what you wanted, but can you kind of lead us through what's available and then what you ended up doing?
Well, I like the idea that you would somehow have a choice, but that's not the case. But I don't know what the tracks are now, but the way it worked then, I think that they have changed this, and I'll get into that in a second as to why I think they've changed it. But what it used to be is there's kind of 3 phases. You go to a field office, you work for 5 to 7 years, and then you go to a protection detail. So it's either president's detail, the vice president's detail, or you could work the intelligence division, which is a headquarters assignment.
Yep.
And then once you leave Washington, or that second phase, you go into phase 3, which is back out into the field. And then your chances of possibly being a supervisor or something like that would exist after you have gone to that 3rd phase. And so there's a lot of transferring, a lot of moving around, which I was lucky enough that I did not experience. And so I think that my understanding, because I've talked to a few agents in the last few years, is that they've gotten away from that. And I think that's primarily because spouses have such good jobs. And, I mean, I remember working with I was working with a woman, her husband was a doctor. And they're talking about transfer her, and she's like, yeah, what are you kidding me? My husband makes 10 times what I make. we're not going anywhere. He's not going to close down his practice because you want me to go to Toledo, Ohio for 3 years because you think it will help round me out. It's like, no. And so there's a lot of that. And also on the flip side is that, when the service was built around the idea of men working and women staying at home. So you just drag your wife and kids with you wherever you went. Well, there were a lot of men that had wives that made more money than them and had careers that they loved. And it's like, they're not moving either. So I think that model has kind of shifted, but that's just my understanding from the outside.
That's good to know. That was a huge part of my decision. My husband had just started a law enforcement job with a new agency when I was thinking about the FBI. And I was like, I'll be divorced in a year. If I go and I can't be promised to come back to LA, like, really, what am I going to do? We're going to have this long distance relationship for who knows how long. Who wants that?
Exactly. In response to your question about what I did. So I worked at the White House for a little bit, and I was in the Washington field office, which, being in Washington, it's a different field office than the other ones because the president's there. And so you are very much tethered to the president and foreign dignitaries. But within the field office, you could work white collar crimes. So you could work bank fraud, check fraud, counterfeiting. There was a task force, but then there was also a protection squad. So you just did protection. And then there was also protective intelligence, which is the threat assessments and those kinds of things. And so I worked some financial crimes, I worked a lot of protection, and I worked a lot of protective intelligence, which is assessing threats and unusual interests in the president and other protectees.
So at that time, were you still having to jog alongside cars for protection?
Nobody did any jogging next to the cars that I'm aware of.
Like, how is Renee Russo doing that in a full suit and a vest and her hair
in heels?
Down? And heels, yeah, and her hair down. No. So who did you get to protect? Are you allowed to talk about that?
Yeah. So I met, I think I met 5 presidents, current and past. So I protected Bush 43, I protected Clinton, I protected Bush 41, President Carter, and President Ford. They were obviously former presidents when I
right.
I was going to say you're remarkably well preserved.
Thank you. Yes, exactly.
Oh my gosh.
And then an assortment of other, probably 100 or more foreign heads of state. And then various other individuals within government that were getting protection assignments based on intel coming in that we were ebbing and flowing as far as who we were protecting, such as Alan Greenspan had a detail at one point as the chairman of the Federal Reserve.
Very interesting. So did you stay in Washington majority of your career then?
I did. I did a little traveling, but I'd say 99% of the time I was in the Washington field offices district.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned threat assessment. Did you get to do a good deal of that at all? And how did you like it?
Yeah. I liked it a lot. The thing I liked, I'm trying to think what I liked most about it. One of the things I liked is that it's the highest priority in the Secret Service.
Okay.
And there's something about working on something that is the highest priority. That means that, people clear out of your way, they help you. You have a lot of ability to make decisions, to get resources. So I liked that a lot because there's a lot of things in the service that they do where it's like, yeah, work on that until we tell you there's something more important to do and you get pulled. So it's hard to have a commitment to something like that. Whereas with the protective intelligence investigations, you could take as much time as you needed and go as deep as you had to.
Yeah, I thought it was just fascinating when we dove into the research for our episode of how early on Secret Service was doing this research and pairing up with mental health to just gather data from the horse's mouth, going out and interviewing these perpetrators and gathering all these data points with all these incidents, and in order to try and start making sense of all of it. And I never heard that. You hear about the FBI and BAU and doing their Mindhunter stuff, and here I'm like, actually, looks like Secret Service was doing this a long time, not a long time, but well before that, because I'm guessing that, it's very narrow scope when you're talking about assassinations and attempts on protected persons. So you can kind of put those resources into that. But I thought it was fascinating, and kudos to the agency for that.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of that research, or at least the newer research, was coming out when I was in training in the 90s. I mean, I know they had done a lot before that, but there was a lot of new stuff. And so what we were getting is kind of like the initial kind of tidbits coming out from that.
Yeah.
And as an intellectual, I don't know if I'd call myself that, but it was, the research was fascinating to me, but my feeling, much like I feel much less impressed with the FBI's work on that, but I feel that it is a nice starting point. Sure, I feel like it's great information that you should give an agent when they're starting out, but you cannot be confined by it. Your own experiences will override a lot of that very quickly.
Interesting.
And so I find it interesting. Like a couple things I remember, like they would say, suicide and homicide run very close together. So somebody who is suicidal could easily become homicidal. And obviously that's not a fact. It's just something that they have seen, observed. That's what the data suggests. I like knowing things like that.
Absolutely.
But, that's something that's good to keep in mind. But then there's other things that you will learn, and you're like, maybe some of the stuff that you were taught, you're just like, maybe not. That just doesn't jive with what I have experienced.
Yeah, I think there's a foundational piece of the information they give you, and then getting that as a new recruit or, early on in your career is great to keep in the back of your head, but you're going to have your anecdotal experience, but also you're going to have the greater tradecraft of threat assessment, where there is a lot more research, robust research in human behavior and how violent people act, that needs to sort of marry up with that. Because I agree with you, and kind of on the heels of what we're talking about, of very rare violent cases, to go and interview a bunch of people about a very rare thing, and each one is so different. What does that then give you? Like the so what factor, right? Like remember my dissertation chair was always like, okay, you want to do this research, but so what? Like, what is it adding to what we're actually doing in the field? And I could see that as, for an agent, going like, okay, this is great and super interesting, and you guys got to do something cool, but what does that mean for me every day going out there and working my cases? Yeah,
and you can't do a threat assessment on somebody and cite other cases. So, what they care about is, what is the danger of this person right now? That's all they want to know. Like, it's great that you can cite, somebody that comes from this kind of family, and that doesn't matter. Like, that's nice stuff to have, but that is not how you can support whether this person's dangerous or not.
It's not actionable. Yeah. I mean, in my day job, that is exactly what I'm up against every day, is like, I know all this history, but if they're not hitting the benchmarks for, arrest or hospitalization, then we're stuck in the same place we were at the very beginning. I wanted to ask you too, before we get too far into the weeds on another area is, since you do, I mean, and I'm serious when I say this, when you kind of describe yourself as more intellectual, what's your perspective, or have you noticed a change in sort of the vibe of the FBI? Has there been a culture change that you noticed from the time maybe when you came in versus the time that you went out, or observationally from your outside perspective now?
Are you talking about the Secret Service or the FBI?
Yeah, I'm sorry, the Secret Service. Okay. My apologies.
Well, I think that there are a lot of things that are happening. I mean, one of the things is it's a much younger agency. I talked about kind of the impact of, I think, having spouses that had good jobs. I think another factor was with the tech boom, which was going on when I was in there, and people could get much higher paying jobs in the private sector at the time. That went away, and they had to react to that as well.
Interesting.
But culturally, what I would say for the Secret Service is that there aren't a lot of written rules at all, but there is a tremendous amount of peer pressure and forcing as far as your behavior within the group and how it operates. And that stuff is incredibly powerful. And so I don't know what it's like now, but when I was there, that was the driving factor. You did not want to stick out. So I'll give you an example.
Interesting.
That I never read anywhere that said we had to wear a suit, like when we did protection. But I remember a guy one time wore a sport coat and pants with a tie. Okay.
Shame.
And I will tell you, I mean, they might as well just have, he been carrying a sign saying "mock me." I mean, everybody gave him grief. Wow. I mean, it was just like, like, are you going out on the golf course? Like, you got another meeting? Like, I mean, people would not let up. And when guys mess with other guys, I mean, they're not trying to be mean, but it stood out, and everybody loved. There was nothing better than somebody screwing up, because then everybody had something to give him grief about.
That's law enforcement culture,
right? The last thing you want to do if you mess up, don't put it over the radio. Do not put that out on the air. You don't want anybody else to know what happened. And so, like, that's a minor. I mean, it's not a big deal, but I'm just like, I was thinking back, it's just, there's nothing that said you had to wear a suit. But I'm sure there were many supervisors who, if you weren't, would say something to you and tell you needed to. But I don't think they could have pointed to a rule, not that I saw.
That's so interesting. I mean, why wouldn't they just make it policy if it's so much part of the culture,
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's a culture. It's not, I mean, there's a lot of things like that. I mean, there's how you speak on the radio. Certain details are very different.
Yeah.
One detail, like, they don't have any communication on the radio. Like, they somehow see that as taboo. And then some, like our field office, I mean, it's like anything and everything we got to tell everybody about.
Sure.
So that's very cultural within that subgroup as well.
So do you have any assignments that were your absolute favorite, or if not assignments, cases that you worked?
I'm probably telling too much here, but so they had an expression in the service about assignments you got. And what they would say is, sometimes you get the bear and sometimes the bear gets you. And I used to say, that is really accurate. Because, like, if you get the bear, then in theory, it's like, oh, you get to eat, you're good. But if the bear gets you, that's not comparable, because you're going to be mauled by a bear. And the bad assignments weren't as bad as getting mauled by a bear, but they're pretty bad. Man. And the good assignments were decent, but it wasn't a, unbelievably great thing. So the bad assignments stick out much more than the good assignments. Mm-hmm. But if I were going to say what would be a good assignment, would be being like stage right at the Millennium celebration on the mall. And so I'm 8 feet from Bono and other people of that caliber. Right. And I don't have a huge assignment other than just, if something happens, I need to lead the person I'm protecting out of the area. And so those kinds of things, those are pretty good assignments like that. You realize, I mean, I probably was, I guess I could figure it out. I was 27 at the time. That I realized that's a pretty momentous occasion. It's a pretty big deal with the fireworks. That I knew what was going on was great, and it was quite an experience to be right there in the middle of it.
yeah, kind of a moment to be able to look around and go, not a lot of people get to experience this.
Yeah, and I'd say another example was I got to manage or oversee the motorcade for the Prime Minister of Israel. And that's his highest threat as the president. You know, there are people at the time actively trying to kill him at all times. And being able to be in control of 30 cars and getting to shut down highways and interstates around DC was so much fun. I loved it because I had maybe 8 or 9 police jurisdictions underneath me that are doing all this. So if we go on a parkway, we have to have the park police close that. If we go into Maryland, we need the Maryland State Police. We had DC police. And so coordinating with all those agencies to shut down all those roads, and then having alternate routes and fake motorcades and doing things to really throw off in case somebody is watching us. That was a lot of fun. And the Israelis take protection and security extremely seriously. So I liked working with them. They were no joke.
Oh, I bet they were just locked on.
Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. I mean, they were, 15-hour days, but I really love doing that.
So in our episode, obviously, I think you said you listened to it because we talked about In the Line of Fire, but we talked about many things having to do with assassinations. $1 million question. What are your thoughts on Lee Harvey Oswald? Since, we know the movie got it wrong.
Yeah, well, what I would say, because there were, I listened to what you guys said. And one of the things that I would say, with the exception of Lee Harvey Oswald, that most people that have either targeted the president or who have unusual interest in the president are not ideologically driven. It's not like they're saying, oh, I disagree with Clinton's policy in the Middle East. They could care less. They might even say that's why they're mad at him, but then they could turn and the next day they're pursuing Bush or somebody else.
Right.
And most of the assassins, including Arthur Brimmer and John Hinckley Jr., both pursued both parties. They could care less, even though you think they have that ideological bent. Sure. So I don't think that's relevant. But Lee Harvey Oswald, to me, I don't think that he is at all how he was presented as this loner, this lone wolf that had a lot of mental issues or something. I see him as much more calculating. And I think there's a pretty good chance that he was working with one or two organized groups. And whether that had anything to do with the assassination or not, I can't say. But I can tell you that with his actions, that he was on the radar of the KGB and the CIA from the very beginning. And both those agencies were most likely believing that he was working for the other one, or thinking he could be a double agent. And I think all of those are viable options for him.
Yeah, it's almost like he was smart enough to get himself in a position where he was on their radars, and or at least it had them scratching their head. Like, is this guy something? Is it someone we have to worry about? Someone that can help us? Whatever. But he was positioning himself to at least have them entertain that he might be useful. So I see what you're saying as far as at least having those capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, being able to get into Russia and to be able to function there for several years. Yeah. He clearly had some smarts to him. I mean, you hear him speak, he's articulate. He's not, he doesn't come across as somebody who is delusional, at least not in his normal thinking. He may have had a high sense of self-worth, something in those regard as well. But I don't know. But yeah, he is a very perplexing individual to me. But he is definitely somebody, I'm sure, when he, my understanding, what I've read, when he was in Russia, the KGB was certainly concerned, why is a former Marine with a security clearance in Russia, trying to defect? And then when he leaves Russia and goes back to the United States, the CIA is thinking, well, we know that KGB was monitoring. Were they just watching him, or were they actually working with him? And so, it's like, and then he's showing up at the embassies in Mexico City, which are completely surveilled by intelligence community. So he's doing all kinds of things that are putting him on all kinds of radars that don't look haphazard to me. So I see him as being pretty organized and had a lot of planning in what things he was doing.
So when I hear you describe him from your perspective, you're pointing out that he's I mean, the impression I'm getting is that he's not just some rube that is being easily manipulated. But that being said, do you get a sense that he was being manipulated on some level? Or are you saying that he was connected to these services that were in line with his belief system?
Well, I think that regardless of whether he was connected in with them or not, they were manipulating him. I mean, that's just part of it. So everybody's trying to screw everybody in those situations. I don't know, he seemed pretty radical. I don't know who he was working for exactly. I think that a lot of the conspiracy theories have a lot more basis behind them if you start looking at the declassified documents, at least as far as this lone wolf presentation is not accurate with him. It's hard for me to say because I just can't get compelling information. I mean, I think you could argue that he was working for the Russians. You could argue he was working for the CIA or that he was a double agent. I think all of those are realistic with what he was doing and where he was and the people that he just was. For a guy that had no education and was so young, the type of people that he was in his circles in Dallas and in New Orleans is just very unusual. That he's rubbing elbows with people who are attachés, which is really code for being a spy, people who have backgrounds that link to the CIA. I mean, that's not an accident that he's stumbling across those people in his day-to-day life.
Wow.
So fascinating. And you're right. Like so much is lost to time. So much is lost to conspiracy and all the theories and the vast amount of work that people have put into those. So I think, when we approached it, we were like, okay, let's just try to go as foundational as possible and background history from reliable sources that we could find and just keep it nice and buttoned there and kind of make our conjecture about some of the things psychologically that we could apply to him or behaviorally. But I think you're right. Like if so much is going to be classified still, just where do you even start to feel like you're getting towards the truth? It's so muddied.
So Gerald Ford, who was on the Warren Commission, he had a quote one time and he said something along the lines of, we told you the truth, just not the whole truth.
Okay.
And which I think is that there's probably a lot to that. And when I was with him the one time, I didn't speak to him, but I was around him and I was thinking about that. And I was just like, it's not appropriate. I could never do it, but I would love to ask him about that. I remember just looking at, that's what I was thinking, looking at him, was thinking about that. So I think Gerald, we have been told some truth.
That makes sense. I could definitely believe that. What we've told you is true. We haven't lied to you. I'm just not going to get everything.
Right.
So you had mentioned that you had the opportunity to meet with John Hinkley, or you met him on some occasion. Is that accurate? Am I remembering that correctly?
No. Well, I saw. So when I was in the service and I was in protective intelligence, John Hinkley was in a mental hospital, and he was under the care of doctors. I'm air quoting because but we can get into the whole insanity defense if you want at some point. Right. So we were just observing him and keeping track of him, and if he left the facility, we went with him. And so I had what I got was that I went with the agent who was assigned to him, and so we observed him for a day. So I got to see him within the facility. So I did not speak to him, but I got to see him. I got to be around him. I got to see the amount of freedom that he had. And it was incredibly shocking to me because my impression of where John Hinkley was that the only thing keeping him from leaving was the honor system. If he wanted to walk away from that facility at any time, he could have. There was one of the walls was about 2.5 feet tall. So that is not a comforting feeling. And I think a lot of people, they get the impression, he's not guilty by reason of insanity. He's put in a mental institution. It's Hannibal Lecter. He's locked in this basement, in this glass, never get out. No, he's just walking around a college campus under the honor system.
Sounds like some of the federal camps.
Yeah, it was very, very unnerving.
Yeah. So they had an agent basically assigned to him you said when he would leave. So what did that mean? Like if he had to go to the doctor, did they have that off-site, or what would that entail?
When I was there, he was bowling a lot.
What?
Yeah. So he would go bowling. I heard he had a mean hook. That's what I was told. That I think he was left-handed and he had a pretty good hook.
Talk about things I would not have expected to learn today. That is yeah.
Wow, they don't let the prisoners at Patton State Hospital do that.
No, they do not.
No, well, he's just a mental patient. He's not. I don't even know if he's considered. He's just in the group.
Right. Wow. Not guilty by reason of insanity. I mean, and then put in a facility. So bowling is an activity. Okay. All right. You probably saw him playing the guitar a little bit, right?
I did not see that, but I knew that he did. I was aware of that, his interests. Yeah.
Right.
Which apparently he's doing a lot of that now.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess that's
On
something
YouTube.
he's attempting to pursue. I'm not really sure what the numbers are, and I can't speak for the quality of it. I haven't, but we'll have to go over there.
I looked on it for prep for this. I did listen to him play.
What were your impressions?
Well, he's better than me, but he's I would have put him at the lower level of somebody who should be performing in front of people. Okay. I mean, he's okay, but I wasn't overly impressed.
So, you open this area of discussion up with what appeared to me to be some opinions about the not guilty by reason of insanity. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I would love to hear your perspective. Yeah,
and I definitely want to hear both of your perspectives on it as well. I completely understand and appreciate the need for that defense. What concerns me so much about the insanity defense is that there's no way to objectively state that. It is merely the opinion of experts. And that's a concern, but okay, so we get that. But what happens and what is so fascinating about the not guilty by reason of criminal insanity, which I understand it's only in 2% of cases and 75% of the time they lose, and it doesn't matter, because to me, the thought that the only thing that could, you could stay out of prison by merely finding an expert that's compelling to a jury that says, hey, he didn't know right from wrong at the time. It's like, okay, he's out. And so that part of it I get, I don't like it. But what I don't like, and this is what happened with Hinkley as well, is that as soon as that verdict occurs, then both sides flip. So the people who were saying that he was sane are now arguing that he's insane because they want him to stay in the mental hospital. And the defense experts who are saying that he's criminally insane, once he is convicted, they now want them to be like, no, he's good now. Yeah. So the idea that essentially the next day you could walk out because now you're no longer criminally insane and you're not responsible anymore, because why would we punish somebody who doesn't know right from wrong and now they do know right from wrong? And I'm simplifying what happens. And I know that there's judges involved and it's more difficult, but that idea that it flips the second you get in there and it is, it's very interesting to me, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I think it is such a complicated issue because the easy one is, okay, are they competent to stand trial, right? Like right now, what we see in front of us, we can do an assessment and just get it done and over with. But you're trying to look into the past and see where this person's mental state was in a situation in which a lot of times there aren't other witnesses. It could just be them and the victim, and doing an evaluation. And here's the problem with psychological evaluations. Majority of it self-report, which is when I was doing them for decades, it was just, I can only make some of these determinations by what the person in front of me is telling me.
And that's a great point and something I zero in on exactly, because it's not only requiring self-reporting, but you're requiring someone to speak against their own best interests.
Oh, 100%.
With that self-reporting. And I've had the, I guess it's a luxury of interviewing many schizophrenics with the threat assessments, dozens and dozens. Sure. And a number of them would admit that they have figured out pretty quickly that they can't tell doctors certain things.
Right.
Because I can't tell a doctor that I'm hearing voices because I know what they'll do to me. So they will tell me that they're like, well, no, I just don't tell them that.
Yes.
So that's, and they're not, I mean, and sometimes they're not anywhere close to being in touch with reality, and they still know that. Like, they know what to not say.
I love that you use that example, because, and then it goes back to the word that Shiloh just used, which is complex, because this is really complex. We make the general public, it's so easy for them to think of, oh, well, this person is being described as extremely severely mentally ill. And then they make a bunch of assumptions about what that means in regards to functioning, and in regards to motivation, and in regards to ability to manipulate. You know, they're all over the place. And that's why the evaluation is so important. They could be, I mean, believe me, I've worked with very, very ill people who are so street smart, like it puts other people to shame. Like, they know exactly how to, I'm not going to say work the system, but they know how to navigate the system in order to survive. It is a survival mechanism for them, but they are still bombarded with all of the serious and chronic symptoms that we see in the most severe mental illnesses. So thank you for bringing that up. You know, I have a problem with it as well. I have a problem with it as well when I see it, when I see like, okay, we're going to restore this individual to competency. And it basically means in a lot of situations that I've seen is that they're able to answer yes or no questions to the process of the judicial system. That's not competency, you know, but they just want, like, do you understand what is happening to you?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
I
Go
think
ahead.
it needs to be a very high bar, and it's not all of the psych stuff, especially when you're looking at potential for violence and violence risk assessment, is just self-report. You know, we do have the actuarial and evidence-based tools to be able to make our best prediction, but assess risk, not prediction, because we can't predict human behavior. And that's just the thing, right? Like, it's sort of like, here's the best, and okay. And I think whenever we look at anything that sort of falls under this big umbrella of maybe even wrongful conviction, if I can kind of make it a step sibling to that, is that the cruel and unusual punishment piece, right? Do we want to put someone in prison that really had zero idea of what their action was, and therefore it doesn't mean anything as far as deterrent or rehabilitation or anything like that? But I don't know how many really rise to that occasion that we can say that's what we would be doing to all of the people that do have this outcome. And the fact that they're going somewhere and not just being like, okay, you get to go home because you're not guilty by reason of insanity, I guess is the happy medium we have to come to.
Yeah, there's no simple answers, and there are a lot of things I grappled with. And most of the people that I dealt with that were mentally ill were not violent at all. They were very nice people.
Oh, sure.
That would call me regularly and want to tell me all kinds of things. They're just very, very nice, very polite. But there were a few that were violent, and that is very scary. And one of the experiences I remember, it was the first time that I was ever involved in an involuntary committal, that I was committing this guy. And he'd made statements that, he was going to hurt himself, or I can't remember if it was himself or others. And he was really worked up, and he was a fitness instructor from Las Vegas, and he had traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet the president, which is a huge red flag. That why somebody, gets up, they're clearly not doing well, that they leave their lives and get in a car and drive for 2 days. Yeah. Well, he did all this, and he was freaking out on me. And I thought, oh, he's just going to beat all of us to crap. Like, I just thought, this guy's really muscular and we're in big trouble. So we transport him to the hospital, and he calms down, and we're in this room, and I thought, and then in comes the doctor, and he's just talking to us like I'm talking to you. Like, he's just fine. And I thought, oh, this doctor's going to think I'm out of it. But luckily, the first question the doctor said to him, he said, Doc, I just want to bounce you off every wall in this room. And I was like, oh, whew. So because I was so worried they were going to be like questioning my judgment or something.
Yeah.
And so they gave him, and I don't remember the drugs, but they gave him the shot that in the movies, they immediately go down. That doesn't have a very quick effect. That's what I remember, that when somebody is really violent and getting really worked up, that shot does not go into effect nearly fast enough. We had a lot of people.
That's Hollywood.
Yeah, we couldn't control him. We had to wait for quite a while for those drugs to kick in.
Oh my goodness. Gosh.
But the vast majority were not violent at all.
So how long did you stay in altogether?
I was in for 4.5 years.
Okay. And then is that when you transitioned out into private investigations?
No.
What did you do afterwards?
Much like Scott, I've had many careers. I have I think a short attention span across many things, but I actually got my MBA in corporate finance. And so I worked in finance and in consulting for quite a while before I transitioned back to more into the crime and being a private investigator and things in that nature. Yeah.
Do you specialize in certain types of cases in private investigation, or what do you choose to work these days?
I don't, but primarily I would like to do criminal defense work. And I am definitely not the criminals have it too easy. But, when you look at most of these cases, the state comes into court with a litany of experts and just detectives and doctors,
resources,
and all this. And even if the person has a lot of money, they're sitting over there with one lawyer. That's it.
Yeah.
So, having a private investigator to be able to validate what the police did. And so, my feeling is that somebody needs to be looking what the police did, and maybe we need to find witnesses. And so I feel like that there's a lot of value in that, even if the person is guilty. And a lot of the clients that I've dealt with were guilty. I still feel that we need to look and make sure the police are doing the right things and that they're charging with the right crimes and that kind of thing. And so I don't always work as a private investigator because I do other work as well in intel related. But that's the kind of work I like to do.
That's great. I think, the more eyes that can be on that sort of thing for just checks and balances, why not? And if you're doing your job right and you're doing it to the best of your ability as prosecution and the, investigation side, then there shouldn't be a problem with it. So good, very good, admirable work. So how the heck did you get into podcasting?
I think it was just kind of like another way to use my brain. I had been writing a lot in the true crime genre, and podcasting was like a step up. It was just like another level. And I actually like that there's not the video component, though here we are.
Right.
And as I'm prepping, I'm worried about lighting. I'm like, my angle, how close am I to the camera? Things you don't have to worry about as a podcaster. And so I like the more I've podcasted, the more I like it. And, working with Javier Leyva on criminal conduct has been an incredible experience. And the amount of, if you're really focused on it, the amount of content and what you can deliver to the public, how quickly, that's an incredible thing versus if you guys have ever been involved in a TV show or a documentary. I mean, it's just, years it takes to put out one thing. So I don't like that at all. I don't like that long drawn out process.
So for those that have not listened to criminal conduct, can you tell us a little bit about it and where you guys are at with it? If you're going to be doing another case, anything like that?
Yeah. So criminal conduct, we do seasons of one case. So we do a deep dive into a case. It's myself and Javier Leyva, and his podcast is the Pretend Podcast. Mm-hmm. And his background is an investigative journalist. And we couldn't be more opposite as far as almost everything, but it seems to gel really well. If you can find somebody that thinks completely different than you, but you can get along with them and work well with them, I feel like that's the best combination.
Sure.
Because if I'm working something and I can't figure it out, I feel like, well, Javier will be able to figure it out because he doesn't think like I do. And, and so we have very different perspectives. And I love being able to go in and having a really strong opinion on something and then 5 minutes later going, no, you're right, and change it.
Well, that also says a lot about you.
For sure.
The ability to take in additional new challenging information and then synthesize it into a different stance is a rare quality that I wish more people had,
Yeah, I don't know where it comes from because I just feel like, I don't know. And even when I'm just like, man, I'm not changing this. And then I'm like, okay, yep, no, you're right, Javier. Or, whoever.
or vice versa. He may be doing the same thing from you.
Yeah, I do try to push on him as well. But so we have looked at many cases for season 4 and we are pursuing one right now. But I mean, our criteria is pretty high because we need something that is going to excite us and keep us enthused.
Sure.
So there has to be many elements that, I mean, just a compelling case isn't enough, because if it's already been told, and we don't want to do that. We only want to do something that is new to us, that hasn't been told in this way, and that we're going to learn a lot as we go along. And so we've stumbled, and we've had to pass on a lot of cases because of that.
Mm-hmm. And do you guys pick cases that have quote unquote been solved and you're relooking into them, or are they open?
Well, I mean, really, we want unsolved cases.
Okay,
that's what I want. And I think for the most part, I mean, because it's just, but then boy, that's so tricky, because then we don't want to pretend. We don't want to pretend like we haven't solved it if we've solved it. And we don't want to play those games.
Sure.
But when you're doing stuff in real time, it gets very tricky with the podcast.
I bet. So tell us about Twisted, your show that you have without a podcast partner.
Right. So Twisted podcast, I do solo, and I do a lot of analysis. And what I do interviews, but I like to do, I do word analysis. I'm very much into language and looking at the words that people use and trying to detect deception. I know you guys are huge into using body language to detect.
Oh, we love body language for telling when someone's lying.
We're experts, aren't we, Shiloh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I like to do a lot of that. I like to look at the words people use. I like to look at the evidence. And my criteria for that is if a case interests me, I'll do it. I don't care about anything else. Whether people want to hear it or not, I'll do it if I like it.
That's awesome. We'll have to have you back to come and just talk about, applying language in that way. That'd be super interesting.
And the one thing I would say about body language and all that stuff is that I think that a lot of people, they mistake stress for deception. And 100%. Just because I think you can pick up on stress, but that doesn't mean somebody's lying. It means they're stressed. And if you ask somebody a sensitive question, they're going to be stressed, whether they did it or not.
So what are your thoughts on the polygraph?
I think it is a great investigative tool as far as trying to get illicit information, but I think the validity of the results are nothing. They're terrible. Yeah. I have talked to too many people. I know too many people who have beat the polygraph. I know too many people who have failed polygraphs when they were telling the truth. So I think it is a good tool to intimidate people and to get information, but I don't think that the results of it have any value at all.
I'm so happy to hear you say that, because we worked with polygraphers in our internship, and Shiloh, you continued to after we left. And 201 that I met, I thought they were the greatest people, fascinating, absolutely passionate about what they did, but they were all in. This is the thing. It's like people on our side, it's like people who are pure Rorschach. And there's a lot of benefits from the Rorschach. There's some really great stuff, but there's some big problems that have come up in the stats on it. And, it's like there are divided camps. People just dig their heels in. And, but I do love that, because we're big on Bob Ruff's Pinion Pines murder.
Truth and Justice.
Truth and Justice right now. And I love, in one of the most recent releases of an interview from, like a decade ago, this mom who is a public figure herself, they're like asking her about, well, why did you tell him not to have a polygraph? And she's like, because it's not admissible in court. She's just reeling off all these things. And he's not expecting her to be so educated on how useless it is, legitimately. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, my problem with a lot of stuff, I mean, in the polygraph is one, but also where both outcomes have the same answer. So if someone is told that their husband is killed and they cry, that means that they're lying. They did it because they're faking. And if they don't cry, it's because they're a psychopath and they did it. And it's like, you can't have both outcomes. And with a polygraph, what I would say is, if you're going to let me take it and I pass it, you'll write me off as a suspect, then I would do it, because I don't care. But what happens is you're going to pass it and they're going to be like, I still think you did it. So it's like, there's no value even as a suspect or a person of interest to take it. They're not going to disqualify you or as a suspect just because of that.
So if you're really focusing on looking at the language that is chosen, are you using any of the existing tools that we in academics and psych, we use, if we're analyzing documents, we can put it into a program that will basically statistically, I mean, it'll gather which words are used most prevalently in what context. And you can, are you using anything like that, or are you doing your own sort of
I haven't. That
approach?
Would be interesting to me, and that actually would be a different type of analysis. But what I do a lot of times, there's not a whole lot of words to look at. So putting in a program is not necessary.
Okay.
But an example, I'll just give you one simple example,
Sure.
would be somebody who says something without using the I pronoun. That is a distancing technique from that action. And most people don't, because it's inferred.
Mhm.
People just say, well, he said he didn't do it. It's like, no, he never said I didn't do it. He said didn't do it.
Yeah.
Didn't do it is not the same as I didn't do it.
Interesting.
And so looking for things like that, you don't need a lot. I mean, now, if you've got a letter like the JonBenet Ramsey War and Peace ransom note, because it's so long,
The
you've got a
manifesto.
treasure trove of things there. Now, that one you could probably run through a program.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of things in that note, as an example, that really tell you a lot about the author, and it's not somebody who wasn't in that house, Shiloh.
Oh boy.
What's-
Oh my gosh, we're out of time. That is so weird.
I timed that. I waited for that to throw that in there.
Perfect.
Drop it, smoke
Right, and
bomb,
just
and
leave.
disappear. Well, for real though, I mean, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah.
We appreciate you following up with us, and we just thought it was serendipitous when we finally got to meet you in person and learned about your background with being in Dallas and putting out the research that we did. So it was so fun to have you here today.
No, I appreciate it. I love hearing you guys. My one criticism was I think that I want Dr. Scott to talk more.
Okay.
In the episodes
Whoa.
I've heard, he doesn't talk as much.
Said
So-
no one ever. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you're like the only. Okay.
No,
you gotta be joking.
I love hearing your guys' assessments on things, because you guys are both very qualified, and I've just been very fascinated. And I was so glad to find your show, and so I'm a big
thank you.
fan now.
Oh, thank
So, yeah,
you.
I love hearing you guys.
Thank you so much. Where can we find Twisted and anything associated with that? And then if a season 4 is coming soon with Criminal Conduct, where do we find those?
Yeah, Criminal Conduct and Twisted are both on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. They're available
Awesome.
everywhere.
Very good. Well, good work. Hey, you sound like you're as busy as we are. So like minds here going on.
Yes. Thank you guys very much. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Thanks so much for your time, John. Take care.
Thank you.
guys.
Hopefully we'll see you soon.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this Saturday. Another Behind the Couch episode in the books. We have the rest of the year booked out with guests, actually through January.
Well, that's
I
up
think.
to you. You did a great job. I mean, this is exciting.
So yeah, we'll keep putting out the information on when to expect those. And that's it. You got anything else, Dr. Scott?
I think that's it. I want you
Okay.
to stay on, though. We're going to do an experiment afterwards, after we close this episode.
Sounds good. All right, guys, take care and be well. Thanks.
Bye, guys.